Our problem is take the bank or split right now. Do not go home, do not pack, nothing. 30 seconds flat from now, we are gone on our separate ways. That's it.
I grew up very much inner city in Chicago, kind of late 50s, very early 60s. Been an immigrant family in a neighborhood that had immigrants, which was southern Italy and from Eastern Europe, and making their way, kind of coming from what Al Pacino called the lower mids, the lower middle class, that upper working class, lower middle class, kind of breaking into the American system, as they could. So it's less about a fascination than it is about an environment. You knew that the cigar store, had a card room in the back. There's names in the newspapers. It's very, very much a Chicago thing in the sense that front page came out of Chicago, came out of that sensibility. Mike Royko's column, writing about this famous family of thieves who were kind of tragicomic, the Pansco family, the three brothers and a sister, So it became it's kind of the lore of the city, as it were. So in terms of knowing about it, it was in the air. It was just part of life on the streets.
Michael and I had a mutual friend in Chicago whose name was Nate Grossman. He said that he had a friend of his who wanted to do law enforcement, police genre stuff. And here I'm a cop wanting to be a writer, and Nate thought, wow, I got to put these two guys together.
Chuck and I became very close friends, and Chuck was a detective in Chicago in a major crime unit. Every city has one major crime unit. In LA, it's the Robbery Homicide Division. In Chicago, it was a CIU. And then through Chuck particularly, started hearing his encounter with the real Neil McCauley.
Neil McCauley was 49 years old the day we met, and he had already served 25 years in the penitentiary. Of that 25, 8 of it was on Alcatraz, and 4 years on Alcatraz in isolation, what they called the hole. The conversation took place almost 40 years ago now. Knowing his background as I did, I'm not going to rehabilitate this man, okay? And I know that going in. So I said to Neil, why don't you go somewhere else and cause trouble? And he said, I like Chicago. It was just real simple stuff. So I said to Neil, you realize that one day you're going to be taking down a score and I'm going to be there. Then he said, well, look at the other side of the coin. I might have to eliminate you. And I remember the very last thing I said to him was, I'm sure we'll meet again. I just said to myself, I wonder where this is going to lead us.
Chuck had cut into the crew, knew the crew was going to do a burglary of a department store. And when Neil McCauley went in, there was one thing that was out of place. He had scoped out the score ahead of time, and he knew everything that was supposed to be there in terms of vehicles and parking lots and everything else. And Neil McCauley didn't know what was wrong, but he knew something was wrong.
I had 2 detectives on the inside of the store. And once you get into a place like that, you can't move around. It's discipline like you've never known, believe me. And it was later that night, it was maybe 5 or 6 hours later, and we had men all around on the outside. And we get a call on the walkie-talkie that the crew's here. So this is going to go down, And of course, you're inside, and you know now that here comes this moment that you've dreaded for so long in so far that you realize that maybe if things don't go absolutely right, you can get hurt or, God forbid, killed. They moved in to the downstairs area, which there was a little basement area in the back of this store, and they just sat there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes listening to see if there's any movement. To this day, I'll never understand what it was that possessed the detective to get up and walk to the washroom, because he couldn't stand sitting in this one position anymore. And the man had to go. And I had told these 2 guys, you got to go, you go in your pants or you bring a cup, but you don't get up and you don't move. And when this guy got up and walked across the floor, that's all Neil had to hear. Goodbye. They boogied, and that was it. That was the end of it. So now the really damaging thing is, now he knew someone was on him. And prior to that, they didn't know anyone was on them.
Well, that kind of self-discipline, that kind of real professionalism, Chuck admired. And he would say, look how great this guy, look how cool this guy is to figure this out, look how smart he is to have seen that and pull back and never go back, even though Neil McCauley had invested $30,000, $40,000 in setting up the score. He was walked away from the score and was never going to go back, was never going to take it, because it was a risk versus reward equation. And because one thing was out of place, the risk component just skyrocketed.
I think sometimes in the course of events, police officers can see a particular individual that they've been chasing, they've been working on, perhaps as a wily, clever opponent that in some ways mirrors their own self-image.
If Chuck was a thief, what struck me was Chuck's sociopathic perspective about it. It's not sociopathic in Chuck's, but if Chuck had been a thief, it would have been sociopathic. What struck me about it was the duality. And that's not what one encounters in fiction. That Chuck had tremendous regard for this guy, had a lot of respect for him, was fascinated by him intellectually, thought the guy was terrific.
If I didn't know who he was and know as much about him as I did, then, I would have probably thought that, he's probably a halfway decent guy.
In fiction, you would think, well, that means that there's a rapport, that maybe he'll cut him some slack. And that wasn't the case at all. Not even one iota of it. Not even a hesitation. Chuck would hesitate not 1 second, dropping a hammer and killing McCauley, which he did subsequently in 1964.
There's a supermarket at 47th and Cicero. It was a day that they did their check cashing. So the armored car dropped off a lot of cash. We had tailed Neil McCauley's crew endlessly. And then the next thing you knew, they drove into the parking lot, and 3 of them came out of the car and went in. In the windows of the supermarket, they had all these advertisements. We could still see all the people that put their hands in the air and what have you, so we knew that it was going down at that time. And then we didn't try to go in. There were too many people inside. It would have been awful. As they came out the door, they spotted my partner and I coming across the street with guns in our hands, and they opened fire at us. But then it was a foot chase, and we got them individually in between gangways of homes, was where we finished them.
And thus the end of Neil McCauley, a largely forgotten figure until Michael Mann resurrected him in this movie.
I didn't mean to be rude. I didn't recognize you. I work in metals. I'm a salesman. My name's Neil.
It was fortuitous that I met Chuck Adamson, who then introduced me to John Santucci and a number of other, and a whole network of people. And I always took these people in one way or another. If they could act, I had them act in these things. So Bill Brown, who was one of the thieves who stole the Marlboro Diamond out of London, has a big speaking part in Thief, and Chuck had a speaking part. And one of Chuck's partners, Dennis Farina, who at the time was still a detective in the Chicago Police Department, had a role in it.
Charlie Adamson called me from Las Vegas and told us that Michael Mann was going to come to Chicago and that he wanted to meet with us, and he wanted some technical advice in preparation for the movie. So myself and some other guys, we took him around and introduced him to some people. Charlie more so than anybody else.
I started him out from the police side of things. And then he would ask me questions in terms of the relationship between professional thieves and cops. And he came out with this very clear, distinct picture of who's who.
He knew these people. He knew the criminals and he knew the cops. He knew them. And he loved them both. And you could feel it in him. There's real respect, oddly enough, for both sides of the law in Michael.
And I think he was more interested in the personal life, in how the job was the wedge, that eventually deteriorated the relationship and it broke up. So he was very interested in that.
Being a police officer is going to change somebody. It's going to change their personality, the way they interact with people after they've been a police officer for some time because of what they see. They just see nothing but, for the most part, the bad side of human nature.
I described the job as many times your eyes were forced to see more than your soul could take.
How else do you do this type of work unless you find you find it that it rejuvenates you in some way, because it's too dark a profession.
It's a very sexy, alluring thing, and you can get caught up in it because it becomes a challenge. You say to yourself, I'm not going to let this person get away with that if I have anything to do with it. And that's what starts eating away at relationships, where you start thinking, well, I'd rather go follow this guy to find out what happens than to meet my wife at 8 o'clock for dinner. So you sacrifice one for the other. And oftentimes you justify it by saying this is a bad guy, and if I get him off the street, I can help somebody. But a lot of people don't understand that.
Then you have the policeman who deals with this stuff day in and day out and gets so far into the criminal mentality, and that becomes their milieu, that sometimes they become almost indistinguishable.
There's always a thing about, they always say about cops sometimes that on the other side takes one to know one. There's a certain element of, a cop that understands the criminal mentality in order to be able to even deal with them, so it's like another side of the coin.
You've heard the expression, the line is very thin, and it probably is, in the sense that you have to think like a thief to catch a thief.
It's an adrenaline rush. Police officers often talk about it. You suddenly feel like Superman. You feel invincible. You feel that nothing is going to stop you from moving ahead with what you're doing. The adrenaline rush works on both sides of the great divide between law and order and criminality.
Crime is it's as possible as anything you could imagine, and meeting some of the guys that really do this, it was pretty exciting.
It used to be years ago when I was coming up, people who wanted to be thieves, they learned how to be a thief. They learned how to do things slick. They learned how to deal from the bottom of the deck. They learned how to go through the roof of a building with a drill and bit and a circular saw. They learned how to punch, peel, and burn open safes.
There was a creative aspect to these guys, and they're very interesting guys. Bright, very charming. There's a certain moral code that they carry that's quite interesting and respectable in many ways. But of course, they're criminals.
Everything's about making that big score. So you don't have to work for the man, you don't have to go back to prison. You're gonna make this one big score, get this nice big chunk of money, and retire to an island somewhere.
It's the doing of it is the juice. It's like playing, I played football. It's like, knocking some guy's brains out when he's coming across the middle is the juice, Winning is fun too, but you want to knock that guy's ass, and, I want him to know that, come over here again, I'm going to try and kill you. We're playing football, baby. This isn't, it's real.
It's someplace that has a value. The criminal, it provides everything. It provides wealth, it provides comradeship, it provides status. It fills in all the things on the other side that you should get to society on a very petty level, usually. Actually, the kind of gang that he had in Heat, sometimes there's no mob like that operating in the United States, and at the most there's one or two. It's here many of those scores, those big scores like that. Because if you've got enough money to take off that kind of a score, to set it up, you don't need to steal, you know what I mean?
Everybody who's a professional criminal knows they're going to jail or going back to jail. You're going to the joint. So you have peace of mind then. You know where you're at. And if you die, good. I'm tired of this way of living, this angst. Or I had a good run. These guys know they're alive and they're crazy.
I can only imagine when you get out, you say, you know what, I'm never going back in. All right, I'm going to straighten out my life and I'm just going to move forward. The realization is when you get out, nobody wants you to go straight. Nobody wants to give you a break. You're an ex-con.
What is this? Where do you think you're going?
So these stories that I heard and became kind of apocryphal and rich, I have always found when you find those rare events, I find them more dynamic and more exciting than what one can make up. Those are very fascinating people.
When these guys walk out the door of
whatever score they're going to take next, they're going to have the surprise of a lifetime.
Heat reminded me of a Greek tragedy. It had so many legs, so many threads, and then it all began to pull in together.
These are morality tales, in a sense. You know, I think they are morality tales, and it's ways of examining the human personality and their weaknesses. You know,
Heat, in my opinion, is the culmination of about 20 years of research on Michael's part.
You went to Michael Mann's world, and you felt it was, no matter where we were in location, there he was, and it was his world.
Heat is like watching reality. It's like watching the 6 o'clock news, only amped up 100%.
A premise for me, or that I had, is about the whole of the film, and that goes all the way back to the writing, which was that just as each person is a universe unto himself, everybody has a life. We tend to two-dimensionalize antagonists in a motion picture. To me, they're much more fascinating if I and the actors and everybody else have the ability to imagine and expand and inflate that into the dimensionality of a life. So that was the idea. In Heat, you know, when you do what I do, this is what gets you going.
This crew is good. You know what they're looking at? What? Us. The LAPD, the police department. It just got made.
First time I decided to write it, I was writing television, and I hadn't even directed Jericho Mile yet, so the chance of me directing this was remote. But it was one of those stories that I felt was such a complex fabric that it would have to really be compressed, particularly thematically. Like, what's the movie about? What's it really about? I took about 40% of the script and decided to do it as a television movie, just to work with the material, because I was drawn to it. So I wound up doing LA Takedown.
It was shot originally, you know, as a pilot possibility of being a television show. The story certainly generally the same, but there's so many other pieces that, you know, you didn't have in LA Takedown that were in Heat that made it a complete film.
If I'd gone to television series, it would have been interesting, you know, that'd have been a nice use of the material, but I'd always planned to make a large motion picture out of it. And it was kind of a prototype, because it was a television shooting sketch. I think I shot it in 17, 18 days, so it was kind of a sketch. And then after that, about 2-3 years after that, I was having breakfast with my friend Art Linson, and the subject came up. I said, well, man, you ought to read the whole screenplay, you know, so I gave him the screenplay. And it was absolutely Art who said to me, you're crazy. You should do this as a feature film right now. This should be your next film. And that was absolutely Art's encouragement that caused me to do it.
I read the script and I went, oh, fantastic, you know, perfect. Bob De Niro for this villain, fantastic. And at the time, I said, I think we can get Bob to do this.
Art went after Bob, I went after Al. It was our first two choices about who should play these parts. Both guys said yes, and that was it, you know. And then I had, what was nice about it is that it had not been developed anywhere, and I owned my own material. So I had a screenplay, and we had a director, and we had a producer, and we had Bob and Al.
I remember Michael showing me this relatively classic story of a pursuit. I remember thinking when I read it that I thought the part that was right for me was the cop. And so I was happy that he wanted me to play the cop.
The style of Vincent Hanna is an Al Pacino style, you know. It's more Baroque. The way he works witnesses, the way he works informants, the way he'll disorient the informant he's with, and making sure that the informant is never on terra firma. When Hanna's working with Ricky Harris, he keeps this guy completely off balance on whether he's going to break into song or berate him or why he wasn't there. And that style, that's Al Pacino.
I thought that I would need to be a little bit more hyper than Robert's character.
Give me all you got! Listen, give me all you got! I swear, man, my brother Richard's gonna talk to you.
I heard Richard?
We came up with the idea that my character chipped cocaine. We sort of formulated the character to be that kind of person so that every once in a while he would explode, you know. And it's a good thing to know that. It's not in the picture, but that's part of what motivated him from time to time. He was a little high.
I ain't your cuz, you rat motherfucker. And you know because I say so. After I hear what the fuck you gotta tell me.
Look here, man. You understand what I'm saying? I'd get killed for telling you this shit.
Kill walking your doggy.
I went out on a limb with that character, can sometimes go a little bit histrionic, a little bit too far. But Michael encouraged it and understood it in relation to the kind of movie we were making and the yin and yang of what Robert was doing, what I was doing.
In most of these situations, it's easier to portray the thieves and the criminals than it is Hannah. And for a long time, I didn't really have Hannah as an equally complex character who had his own dynamic.
It's the journey, not the destination with Hannah. The journey. He's a hunter. And once he gets a scent of his prey, it sort of self-motivates him and it perpetuates him.
Hannah is addicted to this process. This is an elevated state of being an avid hunter and pursuing this, putting together the pieces, sifting through the minutiae, the leavings of a crime scene and putting together what had happened and tracking the people down and getting them and prosecuting them. I mean, that is the elevated experience of this guy's life, and it is a high like no other, and that's what he is turned on by, and that's what he's going to do, and he knows he's going to forego anything and everything else to continue to doing that.
I think he found solace in that world, a certain peace there. As strange as it was, as scary as that world is, he was happiest there. He felt at home there.
Is one thing. When he destroys a lot of the relationships in his life because of it, that's something else. When he is completely and totally conscious as a human being and honest with himself and understands that, all I am is what I'm going after. And that it's not the woman's fault. It's not the situation's fault. It's not unfortunate. Fortune didn't enter into it. He caused these things to happen, and he'll cause them to happen again.
You search for signs of passing, for the scent of your prey, and then you hunt them down. That's the only thing you're committed to.
Life is not an either-or set of binaries. That's something that we compress real life into fiction and make it be that way because it's convenient and mechanically symmetrical. Life's not like that, and that's what excites me, when the power of a character like Hannah to hold seeming dualities in suspense, both at 100%. One doesn't compromise the other. His appreciation for Neil McCauley doesn't compromise one iota. His avidity as a hunter to take down Neil McCauley. Both coexist.
We're sitting here, you and I are like a couple of regular fellas. You do what you do, I do what I gotta do. And now that we've been face to face, if I'm there and I gotta put you away, I won't like it. But I'll tell you, if it's between you and some poor bastard whose wife you're gonna turn into a widow, brother, you are going down.
Art Linson gave me the script and said, read this, I think you'll find it interesting, and I just liked it. I came in first in terms of I committed to the project, and it was Al. And if it had been reversed and he said he was doing Neil, I know I would have gone in on it. But I mean, the one scene like the one that Al and I have is a terrifically written scene. I said, it'll be fun to work on this one.
The fusion of Robert De Niro and Neil McCauley is so total. I can't imagine pulling those two identities apart and telling you why Bobby was right for it. He's committed to the rigidity of that, perspective. And it's a heartbreaking role. It's a tragic, tragic character. What was interesting to me and what's important is that he's autodidactic, he's self-taught, and he elected to have this rigid perspective. Because it's rigid, if he deviates from it, then the repercussions are rigid. And the reason for that is completely practical. It's no other reason, and that is because whatever you're attached to will make you deviate from the most efficient, practical actions.
All I know is there's no point in me going anywhere anymore. I'm just gonna be alone without you. Edie.
In his world, what he's doing, he feels justified in doing it. And the old thing with, with actors, acting is you always have to like your character, more or less. You have to justify what they're doing and feel that it's possible that they could do this, otherwise there's no point in doing it.
You know, I see who he is when all the, that robbery goes awry, and then I try to escape from him. And then that scene where he's kneeling, and I think for his character to kneel in front of a woman, that's where the hope was, but you don't escape, you just don't escape.
Well, she's important to Neil because Neil wasn't, he's doing everything by the book, and life doesn't work that way, Neil goes with this program that he has for himself, and he gets sidetracked by something that he never expected, which is usually when those things happen, I guess.
The thing that was great about the idea of Bob doing this is he creates a character you start to root for even in his badness. That's a very hard thing to do. Very few actors can do it. By the end of the movie, you almost want him to live instead of Al Pacino. It's part writing, it's part what Michael did, but it's considerably part of what Bob did.
Characters are defined by behavior, not necessarily what they say, but what they do. And once Michael directs you into the inner workings of De Niro's character, and you understand him, and you see him grow and evolve, where he can't walk away, which has been his life philosophy. He falls in love. You pull for him because there's love right there dangling, but he turns and he goes back. And you just go, oh my God. But Michael gets you so involved in the character's inner workings because he knows every single layer of every character that's on screen.
Michael's interested in that moment when what you decide will impact your life forever. You will be a different person. If you do this, you will forever be diminished. Or if you do that, you will maintain your integrity and dignity as a human being.
It's not so much good and evil, but the gray areas that exist where you don't know necessarily whether it's good or evil. It's just a choice.
The thing that struck me that was so special about what Michael had achieved there, and I know in his case it's intentional, is he made no judgment about who is good and who is bad. He just let you see what is. And so suddenly you realize that the cop's personal life is as truly fucked up as the robber's personal life. And that both of them, in as many ways, have to deal with the exact same issues and deal with them with the same integrity or the same lack of integrity as the other. And so the thing that makes the movie so special is that it's not this one-dimensional thing about a chase of the good guy against the bad guy. It's very complicated. You get lost into who's on which side. The fact that he was able to write something so special to kind of merge the two worlds, like without making any judgment that one's better than the other, it just is. That's, I think, the genius of the piece.
One of the things that interested me a lot in building the characters that are inside the film was to individualize every part, including small parts. So therefore, I wanted as much polarization in the casting of every single part. So you felt that every single person was, as in fact each person is, a total individual, a universe in and unto themselves.
Waingro, where is he? Where is he?
How the hell would I know?
Michael's strengths are the fact that in this particular adaptation of his own material, it had depth to the characters. And it's the depth that makes it a classic, not the precise, brilliant shooting and the quote style. I'm not saying style's not part of it, but it's certainly, in my place, is in second position to the content. And I think the content comes from the writing, and the content comes from the performances.
Every aspect of the story
no matter how seemingly small, had to be really authentic, which meant that the actors portraying those aspects of the story had to be authentically really incredible actors.
The casting process didn't finish. He was shooting the movie and we were still casting. As a matter of fact, it went on for a long time, in a good way, because we got some very interesting characters.
I didn't know if I wanted to do it right away, and I talked to Michael. I said, Michael, you know, this character is very specific, and I think there are guys walking around that you could be very authentic for this character. He said, yeah, but John, you know, then we wouldn't get a chance to work together. That was such a nice compliment to me, you know, that he wanted to work with me. And with that said, I said I'd throw in and do it with him, you know.
I read the script, and I didn't like it. And then a week later, they said, well, Michael really wants to meet you anyway. So I went in and I met him. And he said, I hear you don't like my script. And I said, yeah, I don't like it. And he said, why don't you like it? And I said, because the people are despicable and there's too much blood and there's no morality and I don't want to be part of it. And he said at that moment he knew that I had to play Edie because she is the only one in the movie saying, who are you people?
Michael knows exactly what he wants, which is really great to have if you're acting. His attention to detail and his involvement with every aspect of it is very strong, and you can feel him in every part of the film, which is basically what his job is. I mean, that's your job when you make a movie, is to have people feel what you're feeling.
And there are many things that actors usually have to concern themselves with that really aren't their job, but they're just things in order to create a whole character, and he's just thoroughly involved in every single aspect. He takes the time, he works out the film experience so that it's ideal.
Working for Michael Mann is like taking that nice, slow backswing and just following through. He would always just say, look, just be yourself. Don't put anything on it. Just be. And that was a great lesson for me because you always want to be more demonstrative. You have this idea of who this character is, so you're going to bring in all this stuff. And the characters are just so rich. I mean, it was like a great action-adventure chess match.
On one level, you're dealing with a crime saga, but also on the other, you deal with the interpersonal relationships that are woven through the entire picture.
This was a huge opera, and we all played our parts, and my part was, you know, the hope that De Niro's character could have of escape and love and forgiveness. There's something so sad about it, so poignant. You know, these people are so lost and they want to be found so badly.
What you hanging with me for, Lillian?
Because I'm proud of you.
You proud of me?
Mm-hmm.
What the hell are you proud of me for?
There was a sense of drive to a certain point, move into the inner lives of these people, explore that in a very formal structure. Everything has changed, their circumstances all change, and then that results in resuming the crime story drive and police story drive. The small idea of the film is that fortune does not really enter into it. People say, well, unfortunately this happened, or fortuitously that happened. Well, that's bullshit. There is not much fortune in what happens. I mean, if it enters into it, but it's a minor player in what happens in our lives. Most of what happens in our lives is what we have cause to have happen. And sometimes it's impossible to undo the interlacing strings of causality. It needs some kind of cosmic microscope to look into each of our lives to see what cause and effect produce the present, but it's things that we made happen for the most part, consciously, unconsciously, so that there's a kind of a almost moral and causal relativity. So that's what the fate is in the film. I mean, it was just something you had to figure out. So that Neil, precisely because he is very dogmatic in his approach, if he deviates from that rigid idea of here's how I must be, then perforce things will go wrong. Okay, he can't suddenly go get all spontaneous. It's all of a sudden, there's no rudder on that boat. And then he's subject and vulnerable to being swept by emotions, like the idea to go back after Waingro, which he shouldn't have done, which Neil McCauley in the beginning of the film never in a million years would have done. But because he elected to be spontaneous in his emotions,